All right, I want to go ahead and conclude this top 15 centers listing. Um, been doing this for a while now, and want to go ahead and wrap this up. Just do a brief recap. Number 15, I had the Joker, Nikola Jokic. Number 14, the Chief, Robert Parrish. At number 13, I had Bob McAdoo, Bob McAdoo. At number 12, Wes Unseld. Number 11, Nate the Great Thurman. Number 10, Patrick Ewing. At number 9, because I include the ABA, Artis Gilmore. Number 8, the league's first true superstar, George Mikan. And number 7, the Admiral, David Robinson. And number 6, the chairman of the board, Moses Malone. Number 5, the Big Diesel, Shaquille O'Neal. At number 4, Akeem the Dream Olajuwon. At number 3, Bill Russell. Number 2, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who of course has been in the news a lot. And at number 1, Wilt Chamberlain. Now this is a change from my prior rankings when I had Wilt Chamberlain number 2. And I stated that at the time I was sort of, I think, influenced by a lot of information that I was reading that was pointing out I didn't even realize that I was being heavily influenced by anti-Wilt propaganda. And subsequently, over the last couple of years, I've just come to the conclusion that I just think that Wilt's the greatest. I think he's the greatest player of all time, and the greatest center, at least, And I get that he only won 2 championships, but I will say this: if Wilt Chamberlain had one great coach for the most part of his career and one winning team philosophy and concept and had Hall of Fame teammates like Bill Russell did, I can't help but think that he would have won more than 2 championships. But he didn't have the benefit of one great head coach. For the most of his career, he had good coaches or mediocre coaches, but he was always had these different coaches who had different philosophies and different schematics, and that he had to adjust to as far as how he was going to play. He always had to adjust to these different coaches. He didn't have the best teammates the first few years of his career, and he didn't have the benefit of free agency, which players today do have. So at the end of the day, I look at that. Yes, Wilt had holes in his game, but at the same time, I just think that Wilt was a more dominant scorer, bigger, stronger, faster, a more dominant shot blocker, a more dominant rebounder. He was so dominant that the NBA had to make rules to slow him down. And when you look at that, the league actually putting through rules to try to slow you down, that means you're truly a force, in my opinion. Want to look at Wilt Chamberlain's resume. 2-time NBA champion. And this is what's interesting about Wilt Chamberlain. The 2 years that he was on healthy teams that had great talent, I'm not going to say all-time great talent, but had great talent in 2 years when he was healthy, they were all-time great teams. The 67 76ers, who I think is the greatest team ever assembled, they won 68 games. The 72 Lakers, 69 games. Another thing about Wilt that gets forgotten is when he was finally on a team that had talent in his career, he started going to the finals. In 67, won a championship. 68, his team had a 3-1 lead, but then injuries in that series hurt the Sixers against the Celtics, and they lost that series. Had it not been for those injuries, they more than likely would have repeated as champions. 69, he goes to the finals. 70, he goes to the finals, Wilt Chamberlain. 71, he goes to the Western Conference Finals. 72, wins the championship. 73, his last year, goes to the finals. So what I'm saying is, when Wilt finally did have help, the end result was that his teams weren't getting knocked out in the first round or not qualifying for the playoffs. They were actually making it to at least the conference finals. But most of the times they were making it to the NBA finals. 1972 NBA Finals MVP. He did this despite having a broken hand. 4-time league MVP. Matter of fact, he's one of the few players to win 3 consecutive league MVPs. 13-time NBA All-Star. 1960 NBA All-Star Game MVP. He scored 42 points in that game. And for something like 55 or 56 years, I think that's about right. Something like 55 or 56 years, that was the NBA record for an All-Star game. I think until Anthony Davis scored 53. What the hell happened to that version of Anthony Davis anyway? But, you know, the All-Star game is different. Back then, for the most part, players didn't play more than 25 minutes. Today, you know, starters in the All-Star game are playing 40 minutes, 35 minutes, you know what I'm saying, padding their scoring numbers. It's just a different beast. 7-time All-NBA first team. 3-time All-NBA second team. 2-time NBA defensive first team. You have to wonder how many of these teams, defensive teams, he would have been on had that been available his entire career. He was a 1959-1960 Rookie of the Year. Had the most dominant rookie campaign in history. 37.6 points per game, 27.2 rebounds per game, and led his team, the Philadelphia Warriors. If I'm not mistaken, he led them to something like a 17-game improvement over the year prior. 7 times, matter of fact, 7 years in a row, he led the NBA in scoring. Of course, he had that unbelievable season, which was his 3rd year in the NBA, where he averaged 50.4 points per game. 50. As amazing as that is, the very next year, he still averaged 44.8 points per game. The year that he averaged 50, Wilt Chamberlain had 45 50-point games that one season. 45 50-point games. His first 5 years in the NBA, Wilt Chamberlain had 97 career 50-point games. 11 times in his 14-year career, he led the NBA in rebounding. He was the preeminent rebounder and the most dominant rebounder of his era. And you could argue of all times. Now, I know there are other candidates. Dennis Rodman, the stats kind of bore it out with Dennis. When you make adjustments to pace and percentage of rebounds available. The only knock on Dennis is that he didn't quite replicate that in the playoffs. He didn't replicate this dominance all the time in the playoffs. Sometimes he did, and sometimes he was a little bit underwhelming. Contrast that to the players like Nate Thurman, Wilt Chamberlain, and Bill Russell, who were dominant all-time rebounders in the playoffs. Of course, Bill Russell had over 4,000, I believe he had 4,104 rebounds in 165 games played 24.9 rebounds per game, number one all time. Number two in the playoffs, Wilt Chamberlain in 160 games, 3,960 rebounds for an average of 24.3 rebounds per contest. So, just amazing numbers. Led the NBA in assists one year, the first center ever to do so. And I believe he's still the only center to lead the NBA in assists. Nikola Jokic may do it in 1 year. Of course, he holds the record for most rebounds in one game, 55. Most points in one game, 100. And in that same game, he set the record for most points in a half, 59. He's on the 35th, 50th, and 75th anniversary teams. His number 13 is retired by the Harlem Globetrotters, the Golden State Warriors, the Philadelphia 76ers, and the Los Angeles Lakers. For his career, he scored 31,419 points, grabbed 23,924 rebounds, an all-time record, and dished out 4,643 assists. He averaged 30.1 points per game. Second to Michael Jordan, 22.9 rebounds per game during the regular season, number one all-time, and 4.4 assists per game, which is very healthy for a center, especially of his era. His biggest Achilles heel was, of course, his free throw shooting. He was terrible at shooting free throws. He got progressively worse throughout his career, indicating that it was probably a combination of him getting stronger physically and, strength and distance. Strength and shooting don't go hand in hand. And I think some of it was psychological, obviously. But Wilt was extraordinarily dominant. Grew up in Philadelphia, born in 1936, grew up in the 1940s. Always was a big kid. I believe when he was 10 years old, was 10, he was already, when he was 6 years old, he was already 5 feet tall. When he was 12 years old, he was already 6 feet tall. And by the time he entered high school, he was 6'11". His final height was 7'1" and 1/16. And Wilt was known for his incredible strength, which has been documented by many people. It's been documented that at age 59, he was able to bench press 465 pounds. And that's a Wilt Chamberlain that had heart problems. He had cardiomyopathy, high blood pressure, had a pacemaker, but was still able to bench press 465 pounds. That's documented. So when Wilt Chamberlain was in his prime, how is it hard to believe that when he was in his 30s and early 40s, he was able to bench press 500 plus pounds? Oh man, it's impossible, man. Look how small he is. And then they always use the pictures of Wilt when he was in high school, when he's 240 pounds or 230 pounds. No, use the picture of him in the 70s when he's walking around like a fucking Hulk when he's 320 pounds, you fucking dickhead. But I get irritated by that because there's a lot of people that see shit but don't want to believe it because I know better because I know, these types of idiots. But he was a tremendous athlete. He's arguably the greatest athlete the NBA has ever seen. They're going to say it's LeBron James. It's Wilt Chamberlain, all right? And it's not even particularly close. He was a track and field athlete. The man played volleyball and was one of the great volleyball players in the world. And I'm not just making that up. Um, he could throw the shot put. He played tennis, um, weightlifting. I mean, the guy was just a natural athlete and was a great athlete. Had something like a 48-inch vertical leap, 48, almost 50-inch vertical leap in his prime. Even after that devastating leg injury that he suffered in 1969, which probably no other athlete would have been able to come back from. He was able to come back from an injury to his leg, to his knee, excuse me, that normally takes people, even today with the advancements in medicine, an injury that usually takes people something like a year to 2 years to come back from, he came back from and was ready to play in 5 months. That goes to show you the determination and the athletic ability of this man. But he was never the same after that. And when you look at most highlights of Wilt, it's when he's a Laker with the headband. And this is after the leg injury. And his vertical leap had been slashed from 50 or 45 inches to more around 30 inches. But he still was a mighty presence. He went to Overbrook High School, was dominant there. During the 3 seasons he played there, his team went 56-3. They broke Tom Gola's Philadelphia high school scoring record. He did, I should say. 2,252 points, averaging 37.4 points per game. When he went to college, when he was deciding on where he wanted to go, he didn't want to go down south, obviously. This is the mid-1950s. He didn't want to go up north. He was already living pretty close to the north. So he decided to go to the Midwest, and he decided to play for Fog Allen at University of Kansas. He would go on to resent making this choice because he had no idea that Fog Allen was going to retire so soon, and his replacement as coach, Dick Harp, he and Wilt did not get along very well, and I think some of it was racial. I know Wilt didn't always sweat that type of stuff, but some of it was indeed racial. I believe Wilt Chamberlain left college 1 year early, and there was a rule at the time that prohibited college athletes from playing in the NBA because there had to be a 4-year period from the time that you enrolled in that school to when you was drafted in the NBA. So he played 1 year with the Harlem Globetrotters. He said it was one of the great experiences of his life. And then he made his NBA debut in October of 1959. At this time, he was 7'1" and 258 pounds, and he became the highest paid NBA player when he signed a $30,000 rookie contract. During the 1960s, his contract would eventually go up to something around $100,000, and I believe when he left the NBA in the early 1970s, I think he was making something around, I'm just guessing off the top of my head, I think he was making like $250,000. It's been a while since I saw the figures. About $250,000 a year. So, like I said, the notion that these guys were making chump change, especially considering it's the 1950s and 60s, is bull. The players who were struggling financially were the players in the 40s and 50s. By the 1960s, the majority of players in the NBA were making sufficient money so they did not have to take a secondary job driving a bus or, driving a cab or whatever the hell people like to do to try to besmirch these players. But man, Wilt had statistically the greatest rookie year of all time. I think I said it already. 37.6 points, 27.2 rebounds. He led the league in scoring multiple years, but unfortunately, he was never able, his first several years, to win a championship. He just could not get past Bill Russell and the Boston Celtics. They were just too damn good. Now, even though on paper, wins losses wise, Bill Russell dominated Wilt Chamberlain, one on one, Wilt Chamberlain dominated Bill Russell. In their matchups, Bill Russell averaged 23 points and 14 rebounds per game. Any other situation, those sound like dominant numbers for a player. 23 points and 14 rebounds a game, career-wise against another player, they had to be dominating. Well, Wilt Chamberlain, despite being often, and this is why I use this picture, because I wanted to show that oftentimes it wasn't just Bill Russell guarding Wilt. Another Celtic would come on the blind side and help defensively. This is what Wilt Chamberlain had to deal with. But anyway, in his career against Bill Russell, he averaged 29 points and 29 rebounds per game. And most of these Game 7 losses, these series losses, Wilt Chamberlain usually came through big. And the deficits in these games, as far as Wilt's teams losing to Bill Russell, usually was small single digits. So despite the talent level of these teams, most of these games came down to the backcourt. And usually Bill Russell's backcourt was just infinitely more talented offensively than Wilt Chamberlain's backcourt before he went to the Lakers. You had Bob Cousy, who could score 18 to 25 points a game. Bill Sharma, the best shooter in the game, who, even in his later years, was able to score 18, 20 points a game. Then you had young Sam Jones, who could put up 25 to 30 points in his sleep. Then you had John Havlicek, who developed from a defensive prospect into becoming a great all-around player who could give you, off the bench, 17 to 20 points per game. Wilt's teams could not compete with that. And the only time Wilt could really beat these teams if he had one of these rare nights when he was shooting the basketball like a string was attached to the basket, and he might have scored 50 or 60 points, and with great efficiency, and maybe some of these other guys helped out and they were able to beat them. But anyway, I want to go ahead and try to move faster in this one. When Wilt got to the Sixers, he changed his style. No longer was just this primary scoring machine. All-around player. Playmaker, scoring, rebounding, defense. His shot attempts dropped from 25 shot attempts to 14. And subsequently, for the rest of his career, with one season being an exception, he usually shot somewhere between 10 to 15 shots a game. 66-67, one of the great teams of all time. They won the championship, 68-13 record. Went 11-4 in the playoffs. Somebody said, well, how can they be one of the great teams? They lost 4 games. But then you got to look at who they played in the playoffs. They weren't playing poor teams. They weren't playing against some bad teams. They're playing some really good teams in the playoffs. But ultimately, they won the championship. Injuries derailed what could have been a repeat. And in 1968, Wilt Chamberlain was traded to the Lakers. Why? Because the Lakers lacked a dominant big. And that first year there, they were able to go to the NBA Finals. But ultimately, in a game that in a series that they should have won, the Lakers blew what I believe was a 2-0 lead to the 4th-seeded Boston Celtics and lost that series in 7. The Lakers would go on to win a championship in 1972. in a team that won 33 games in a row, including 69, not to mention 69 overall games. And they would routinely go to the finals, 1970, 1972, 1973. But they were going up against some quality competition, man. If it wasn't the New York Knicks that had 5 Hall of Famers in their starting lineup, later on they had a Hall of Famer, I think Hall of Famer and Jerry Lucas joined the team, should be Hall of Famer and Dick Barnett, or whether they're going up against and facing the Milwaukee Bucks, who at the time were in the Western Conference. It wasn't like they were going up against these scrubs. So all in all, Wilt Chamberlain, to me, the most dominant player. I get that some people say he didn't win enough, but I really believe that's an oversimplification of the man's career. And that's about it. I know after he retired, he spent like I think a season or two with the ABA as a would-be player, but he turned out to be a head coach with the San Diego Conquistadors. Then he quit that. I think he was a volleyball player. In the 70s, Wilt apparently was getting his quagmire on. I mean, fucking and sucking everything. You know what I'm saying? And maybe the AIDS virus kind of slowed him down a little bit. Don't want to get AIDS and shit. The 80s became a bit of a conservative era. Obviously, attitudes had changed about sex. Wilt had this tremendous book that came out in the early 90s where he made a claim that he slept with 20,000 women. And, during the 1990s, unfortunately, Wilt's health began to deteriorate. He began to suffer from heart problems. He lost a lot of weight. I believe he had a pacemaker implanted, and his health deteriorated rapidly. Starting in 1998, he had gained a lot of fluid weight, but then over the course of I think maybe 6 weeks in 1999, he lost like 50 pounds after dental surgery. An injury that he suffered back in the early 1960s was really beginning to bother him. And he deteriorated very rapidly. On October 12th of 1999, Wilt Norman Chamberlain died at the age of 63.